China has just cut off iron ore imports from BHP, without warning. Ships already loaded and sailing toward Chinese ports are now being turned away. Beijing's message couldn't be clearer. Switch to renminbi settlement, or lose access to the world's largest buyer. For BHP, the stakes are enormous. Up to $30 billion in annual revenue is now hanging in the balance. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a strategic maneuver that could reshape global commodity markets and challenge the US dollar's decades-long dominance in resource pricing. Australia controls roughly 51 billion tons of iron ore reserves, more than a quarter of the world's total supply. The Pilbara region in Western Australia holds some of the richest and most accessible deposits on Earth. High-grade ore, concentrated mining zones, and efficient extraction make Australian ore a premium global product. Mining titans like Rio Tinto and BHP built entire empires here, feeding steel mills around the world with millions of tons each year. China alone absorbs about 83% of Australia's total iron ore exports, worth nearly $79 billion annually, or about two-thirds of all trade between the two nations. No other customer even comes close. For Australian miners, China isn't just a key buyer. It's the buyer that decides whether operations stay profitable or shut down. China does have its own iron ore reserves. So why buy from Australia? And at higher prices? The answer is quality. Chinese ore averages only about 33% iron content per ton, meaning just one-third of the material is usable metal. Australian ore, on the other hand, typically exceeds 60% purity, nearly double. And there's more. China's deposits are scattered across smaller mines, making extraction complex and costly. Rugged terrain, remote locations, and higher labor costs only add to the expense. In pure economic terms, it's still cheaper for China to import high-grade ore than to mine inferior material at home. This trading relationship has been anything but smooth. BHP, one of China's largest suppliers, exported nearly $30 billion worth of ore in 2024 alone. That level of business gave the company major leverage in price negotiations. When demand surged, prices spiked. With extraction costs around $20 per ton, BHP often sold to China for several times that amount, generating enormous margins. Naturally, Chinese buyers grew frustrated with their lack of bargaining power. Geopolitics made things worse. During the 2018 US-China trade clash, then-Prime Minister Scott Morrison aligned Australia firmly with Washington. Canberra joined efforts to contain China's economic expansion, and iron ore became a pressure point. Prices for 62% grade ore jumped from $70 to over $220 per ton within months. Australia appeared to weaponize its resource dominance, using the market to extract maximum profit, while China had few alternatives. Chinese manufacturers were cornered, either pay inflated prices or slow production. Beijing decided it would never again be that dependent. Between 2018 and 2022, China quietly diversified its suppliers. Its reliance on Australian ore fell from 87% to about 40% as new trade channels opened across Africa, South America, and beyond. The plan worked. When Anthony Albanese's Labour government took office in 2022, Australia's tone shifted from confrontation to economic pragmatism. Trade barriers eased, diplomatic ties reopened. By 2024, iron ore commerce had rebounded to levels not seen since 2017. Relations finally seemed stable. Then, Beijing made its move. On September 30th, 2025, China announced a sudden suspension of all BHP iron ore purchases. From that day forward, every transaction must be settled in renminbi. No exceptions, no grace period. Even shipments already at sea were subject to the new rule. This wasn't just a preference in currency, it was a direct challenge to the global order that underpins commodity trade. For over 20 years, China has been the world's largest iron ore buyer, yet it's rarely held pricing power. Current market prices hover around $80 per ton, but long-term contracts with companies like BHP often exceed $100 per ton. That $20 difference, multiplied by China's 700 million tons of annual imports, adds up to more than $10 billion in extra costs every year. The imbalance persists because the few big sellers control pricing, and because the US dollar still dominates the trade. Now, China wants to rewrite the rules. Beijing's preparation for this moment started years ago. The creation of the China Mineral Resources Group unified the country's steel industry under one powerful buyer. Before that, hundreds of smaller companies negotiated separately, letting sellers play them against one another. Now, with centralized purchasing, China wields true bargaining power. And with the Renminbi framework already in place, it was just a matter of timing. This move goes far beyond iron ore. The internationalization of the renminbi has been one of Beijing's core strategic goals. Commodity trade, especially in high-volume resources like iron ore, is one of the main pillars supporting the dollar's global dominance. By forcing renminbi settlement, China aims to expand its currency's global reach while chipping away at the dollar's monopoly over resource pricing. There's also a defensive side to it. Using the renminbi reduces China's exposure to U.S. financial sanctions and vulnerabilities in dollar-based payment systems. Now, with iron ore demand as leverage, China is ready to pull that trigger. The impact on Australia was immediate and severe. BHP earns roughly 60% of its total revenue from Chinese buyers. In 2024 alone, it shipped 250 million tons, generating over $30 billion. When the suspension hit, BHP's share price plunged up to 4% in a single day, wiping out nearly $39 billion in market value. If the standoff continues, annual losses could reach $30 billion. But the consequences extend far beyond one company. Western Australia, which produces 80% of the nation's iron ore, depends heavily on mining royalties, around 40% of its entire budget. A prolonged freeze could push the state into a $16 billion deficit. Then comes the human cost. The mining sector directly employs 150,000 Australians, with another 500,000 in support industries, logistics, manufacturing, services. If exports stall, mass layoffs could follow, turning an economic problem into a social crisis. Rio Tinto, Australia's other mining giant, has already hinted it's open to renminbi-based settlement. This confrontation underscores a deeper shift in global economic power. For decades, the United States dollar has been the universal medium for commodity trade, granting Washington enormous influence over global markets, and enabling it to wield financial systems as geopolitical tools. China's expanding economic weight now gives it the foundation to challenge that order, but only if it can turn its market power into institutional reform. Iron ore is the testing ground, a high-volume, strategically essential commodity where China's dominance as a buyer is undeniable. Australia sits trapped between two irreconcilable imperatives. Economically, accepting renminbi settlement makes overwhelming sense. It preserves exports, jobs, and national revenue. Geopolitically, giving in would undermine the dollar system that sustains United States global power and the broader Western-led economic order. Canberra cannot satisfy both Washington and Beijing at once. Every decision carries profound consequences. For BHP, the dilemma is equally sharp. Shareholders want profitability and stability, but nearly half of those investors are American, many tied to institutions that view dollar dominance as non-negotiable. BHP's leadership is under intense pressure from all sides. One urging pragmatism and compromise, the other warning that compliance could be seen as a strategic betrayal. Meanwhile, Chinese steel mills continue operating smoothly. Fresh supply from Vale and the imminent Simandou output ensure production schedules remain steady. Beijing has shown that it can break with BHP without serious disruption. The message to Australian suppliers is unmistakable. China's terms are final. And alternatives exist. This isn't a bluff. The infrastructure investments, supplier partnerships, and procurement institutions China has built over the past decade are now functioning as designed, transforming theoretical leverage into real, operational power. The implications reach far beyond iron ore. If China successfully enforces renminbi-based trade in this market, other resource sectors will soon feel the same pressure. Copper, aluminum, nickel, lithium, every material vital to the modern economy where China is the dominant buyer could become the next currency battleground. As more exporters accept the renminbi, network effects accelerate. More suppliers make it convenient for more buyers, and the currency's global role expands naturally. The dollar dominance built over decades could erode faster than anyone anticipated. This moment is about far more than a pricing dispute. It's a visible manifestation of a profound reordering of global economic power. China's evolution from factory floor to technology and finance leader has been well documented. But only now are we seeing how that transformation rewires the institutional architecture of global trade itself. The Bretton Woods-era systems, dollar-based pricing, Western control of financial infrastructure, were built when China's economy barely registered in global statistics. Those frameworks no longer reflect today's reality of economic power distribution. Australia's decision will echo far beyond Canberra or Perth. Other United States allies, Japan, South Korea, and nations across Europe, are watching closely, weighing their own exposure to similar pressure. Each depends on China for trade, but also on the United States for security. Australia's choice will set a precedent for how democratic economies manage that tension. If Australia accepts China's terms, others may conclude that economic pragmatism outweighs strategic loyalty. If it holds firm and absorbs the pain, it signals that the Western Bloc still has unity, even at significant cost. For Beijing, this iron ore confrontation serves multiple objectives at once. It reduces input costs for its manufacturers. It advances renminbi internationalization. It tests the strength of Australia's alliance commitments, and it establishes a template for future resource negotiations. Even a partial victory, such as a mixed currency settlement, would prove China can extract concessions from Western-aligned suppliers, eroding the sense of dollar inevitability. The next few months will decide whether this is a temporary standoff or a permanent transformation in how global resources are traded. BHP's response, Canberra's decision, and the Western Alliance's reaction will define the trajectory. But one truth is already clear. China now has real alternatives and real leverage. The era when Western suppliers dictated terms to Chinese buyers is over. A new equilibrium is forming, and the transition will be anything but smooth for those who thrived under the old system. What unfolds next, in the Pilbara, in Guinea, in Brazil, and in China's steel mills, will determine whether the dollar remains the cornerstone of global commerce or whether this marks the beginning of its slow decline. The iron ore standoff may be just one chapter, but it could be the one that future historians mark as the turning point, the moment when abstract theories about currency rivalry and shifting power became tangible, measurable reality with clear winners and losers.